Good afternoon, listener. Thank you for listening to the Land of Hope podcast. It's always a gift to get to be on here, and I think when this will be published, it'll be, I don't know, over 230 episodes, and it's really exciting, and I'm just so blessed to have met so many people. But today I'm speaking with Kristine Sutherland, and it's so cool to meet with her because we actually were on a Zoom call together months ago, and then there was a bunch of electric stuff going on. I needed to reschedule. So kind to reschedule months later, so we're now again back, hopeful that the Zoom link will stay as. But Kristine is an actress. I mean, she's done theater, she's done television, she's done some films as well. Um, like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and then there's Buffy the Vampire. You probably know her as the mom television show. Um, but what was really interesting to me about Kristine also is that she has done some photography, I believe, as well. Um, and I just her story of coming into the acting world is kind of neat. She started out in theater and she didn't intend really to become an actress, I don't think, at least based on what I had read about her. So Kristine, before we dive in, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Danielle. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I want to ask you, you've done television. It seemed like you've done mostly television. That's been the biggest thing. And then you've done films and you've done theater. And I think you've done a little voice work too. Is there a medium that you prefer over one or the other?
Yes, I definitely prefer film.
Okay.
Um, I was far too anxious when I was younger, and the anxiety of the theater was just horrible for me. I would go out after the show and feel such a sense of relief, especially if it had been a good night. But then I would wake up the next morning and go, oh my God, I have to do it again.
Yeah.
To do again. I would spend the whole day being anxious, just like that pit in your stomach. And but I loved acting. So when I did a lot of commercials for a while, and that was a really great training ground to become totally comfortable with the camera, to understand when something's a long shot, a medium shot, a close up. Um, there was the opportunity to watch the monitor. Years and years ago in film, you couldn't watch the monitor because the, the way it worked was that the film had to go away and be processed, and nobody really had the video equipment to do it. But commercials, I believe, started doing it first. So I was able to just kind of walk over to the monitor and watch it with everyone. And it would be like, oh, okay, got to bring my chin down just the tiniest bit. Okay, I get that, and when I walk over here, it doesn't seem quite right. So I was able to really get a sense of working with the camera, and that was wonderful. So by the time I started television, it all that technical stuff about working in that medium, I had sort of ironed out, and I loved it because you've got like 100+ people on the crew, but it felt so intimate and so personal. Like whatever was happening beyond, you were just in that scene with these people, and everybody else was just there to support you and make it happen. They didn't feel like an audience that was just out there. They were like, yeah, get that take, we got to go to lunch. Or you'd get back from them the sense that you'd feel the sense of that was good, that was good. Um, and that was just the kind of environment that I really, really loved. I felt just so comfortable and safe and at home. Some actors feel that on stage and don't feel that way on film. I mean, it's amazing
Yeah.
how individual that sense of safety is in different mediums, and how different actors can be about where they feel most comfortable. But that was really clear to me once I started film that that's what I wanted to do. And I didn't need to put myself through all that anxiety. There was another place that I could act and enjoy all that that was a safer space for me.
Was it helpful that you knew with the camera, like you could redo something? Was that just comforting that it didn't?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, very much so. And and then, pretty early on, they started being able to do the video recordings of what we were doing. So you did, especially when you were a regular on a show. When you're a guest, you can't, it's a little presumptuous to do that. But, I felt totally comfortable going over and peeking and going, oh, okay, I know what I need to do differently.
Okay. So you don't mind, I would, because I've talked to several actors and they're like, I never look at what I do. Like I just do it, and if the director says I did fine, then I don't ever go back. And then others are fine with stuff, but
Yeah.
it doesn't be as common their things. But it's interesting because you keep saying you like to go back to yourself, and I find that that's a humbling thing to do. Do you did that just naturally? You're like, oh, I'm gonna enjoy this. I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna look and critique myself. Or was that hard? Because I think I would just be
Yeah.
like, yeah, if I'm good, I'm not gonna look at my face. Like,
Well, it takes a lot of forgiveness and a lot of humility because, when I go back and like watched an episode, I would be like, oh, that was really good. I really believe that. And then I'd go, oh, that wasn't so good, but that's okay. You know, I did never expect perfection.
hmm,
Um, so I think that was really helpful because I know a lot of actors who can't bear to look at themselves, as you
yeah.
say. And it never bothered me. It never bothered me. To me, it was an opportunity to improve. And I didn't expect myself to be perfect. So I think that was very helpful.
Did you have in the projects that you did you have an environment that helped that? Because I know there are some directors who are very, very perfectionistic. So you would do it like 20, 30, and still it wasn't good enough, or there was just like a slight change of movement that they didn't like or needed to be changed or whatever it was. So did you have a team often that fostered that where it was like, yeah, it's okay, you did good. Like it's not a perfection.
Yeah, I've been really lucky to work in really good environments. And I know other actors who've worked with people who scream and throw tantrums and yell and insult actors. And, that's just so horrible because what we do, we have to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And, if you can't be safe, then that has it's a huge obstacle to get the best that you have. And also, Josh, on Buffy, if he really didn't like a scene, once we got a second team in, he would say, I want to reshoot this scene. And they would do it while the other episode was shooting. The second team would come over and we'd redo the scene. So that was also a luxury. Like if it really didn't work, um, mainly according to him,
Yeah.
But that's okay. Yeah, I totally trusted him on that. And it would be like, great, okay, I get an opportunity to change this. What is it that you envision that's different? So that was another safe thing is you can not only do different takes, but you knew that if it was really bad, you'd get to reshoot it down the road. And and just with the passage of time, even if it's a matter of days, you're slightly different every day.
Sure.
If I listened to this interview by an actor, and it was about because people have to put themselves on tape now. We used to go to casting offices and do that, and it headed that way, and then COVID just totally opened that up. So that can be a little nerve-wracking because you have to record yourself, you have to do the background, you have to find somebody to read with you. It's a lot of work. But this one guy said, I shoot it in the morning and then I look at it, then I go back in the afternoon and reshoot it. And it's almost always better.
Hmm.
Because you it settles in and you bring something differently, bring in something, different. So
Yeah.
that was kind of like what those reshoots were.
So, safe space for you, acting wise, is you would say a place where people pretty amiable, super realistic, more of a relaxed environment. And
Hmm.
um, you say too, like appreciative of the fact that you're there, kind of thing, as opposed to taking for granted that you have the role and so you just do whatever you're supposed.
Yeah, the Buffy crew was very much like that. They were younger than some crews and they really believed in the show. They Everybody did their part and everybody wanted the whole show to be done well. And I think it was Tuesdays, um, it would air and everybody would still be working, so they couldn't get to it. So they would wheel in a television. I can't believe that it was like a big, wide television at the time. And they turned the lights down and everybody would quietly come into the room where we ate lunch and watch the show. And if somebody came in and was talking, they would be like, shh, it was like we're watching the show. This is a great moment for us because we see what we all did 3 weeks ago, or they put them together pretty quickly because you had to keep up with a television schedule of, I don't know, 22 to 24 episodes a year.
Right. Do you, in the time you've acted and done all these different stories, is there something you think that makes a good story? That, maybe a director follows a certain arc, and each time he's done that, whoever the director is, you're like, this is a good story. It just doesn't change. This makes a good story.
Mhm.
Or do you think it's much more of a flexible thing? Like there's not really, because I know some people I've talked to, they really do see story as just whatever you want it to be. So there's not really any sort of framework. It's just go out there, do whatever you feel are creative. And those are definitely artistic films in a sense, but sometimes they're really hard to follow, in my opinion, because you don't really have, there's not a character going through some sort of transformation. It's just a lot of things happening, and then the end happens, and you're kind of like, okay, well, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say or gain from this, but that was interesting from like a visual standpoint, but it's different than a story.
Yeah.
So, what do you think about that?
For me personally, I'm all about story and a story where you're following the story and you think you know what it's going to be, and then it surprises you. I felt like the vast majority of the scripts on Buffy were like that. And it was a real coming of age story. So there were just these really universal themes that were being tweaked slightly, by the circumstances. But the overall story was a coming of age story. And I loved the fact that, I mean, Josh had a real vision. And so, well, I'll get to that in a minute, but he had a real vision and, um, and watching that unfold was amazing. Like when Buffy starts, in with this obligation to the world that she's not sure she really wants to carry that on her shoulders. And the world is very black and white. It's very good people, bad people. It's very clear. And then as it progresses through the seasons, that becomes less and less clear, and there's so many more gray areas. And, you know, getting along with friends, like I felt like my death was really amazing because she is fighting off all these, evil vampires and saving the world week after week, but she can't save her mother. and that's losing someone important to you is a really defining moment in the process of growing up. And some people like get into their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s and have never really lost anybody. Um,
Mm.
and for me, that it's been a tremendous source of growth to deal with those unexpected things in life that you can't control. So I thought it was just brilliant on his part that she loses her mom and then she has the role of mother to her younger sister to take over.
Yeah.
So, it's a full circle. I didn't like
Well,
having to die. I could have done that show forever and ever because I enjoyed it so much. But, it's all about story. The story comes first. And I think for me, I I guess I approach acting, I look to the words first to reveal to me what's going on. And I don't think all actors do that. For some, it's actions that get them there. For me, it's the words. I guess that's part of the theater training.
the dialogue.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
take the dialogue and then you're gonna do your interpretation of that. And I I I love it when there's a strong director and he's taking responsible for the full story and telling that full story, and you're showing up to do your part. And in an ideal world, you can trust them to have you make adjustments this way or that way to fulfill and realize the story.
Yeah.
But every script that you got, you couldn't wait to get home and read it because it was always going to surprise you about what was going to happen.
Well, I want to, it's, you said so many things there, but one thing I wanted to ask you is with television, and this is personally for me, I love television from before the 2000s or like into the early 2000s, and that's really kind of where I stay. There are some modern TV shows that I enjoy to some extent, but I just don't find them as entertaining even. Like they're entertaining in a I feel saying this, but this is just me. It doesn't seem as witty or well thought out or great dialogue anymore. So like
Mhm.
something fumpy happens or slapstick and then you're supposed to laugh and kind of thing. But
Yeah.
I really enjoyed one of my favorite television shows, something I still watch a ton is like Dick Van Dyke and um All in the Family, which obviously now
Hmm.
is considered much it's pretty, they didn't, it was some racist slurs back then and things we wouldn't use
Yeah.
now, but just the characters and the conversations and the things they would face. And
Hmm.
like I related, and I'm like, even now, you still relate to a lot of those things. And even coming from a dysfunctional home, there were so many things in, even All in the Family or in um, even the Partridge Family, which was like the first kind of broken up home where there wasn't a dad figure. Like these things were just really interesting and they had some things to say about life that you could take away from them.
Hmm.
And so, do you think, like television wise, do you feel that TV has changed in the way it's telling stories as opposed to, when you were more predominantly in television?
You know, I don't know if this is embarrassing or not, but I don't watch television. I wa I don't have a TV, and
Not a
so
bad thing.
I can stream things,
Yeah.
um, and do that, but I don't really watch television. But when somebody says, "Oh my gosh, this show is incredible," then, I try to tune in.
Yeah.
But I'm more of a reader. And what you said something, and I wanted to. There were periods when television was really bad, like in the 80s.
Yeah.
It really, really bad. And the dialogue was practically unspeakable. So having worked on things like that, getting on Buffy was amazing because it was really good dialogue.
Yeah.
And in many ways, it spoiled me. But there was a lot going on at that time. ER, um, Mad About You, which was the scripts on Mad About You were like double the pages
Yeah.
of other scripts because there was just this really snappy dialogue going on between husband and wife, um, in the way that that plays out, in the home. And that was real. That was a big change in television. And at that point, like in the 90s, the the people who became the showrunners, who were responsible for, bringing on their team of writers to write the dialogue, uh, that that changed significantly because in the 80s, it was you just didn't do television. It was like the lowest form of life. And it was. And like actors would go, I don't do TV. I don't do TV. Um, and there's a number of big actresses who turned and actors who turned down roles that they had to come to regret not having seized that opportunity. But it slowly changed until a lot of film writers, because film at that time became more and more blockbuster shows, action shows that are geared towards an international audience because like things opened up. The Berlin Wall fell, and
Mm-hmm.
Eastern Europe came into the West, and they all desperately needed product because they hadn't shot anything. So they were buying all this stuff from Hollywood. So that market became huge and became a huge income generator.
Hmm.
So it attract and some writers didn't like doing film because they didn't have enough control over it. And so they started going to television where they could not only make a phenomenal amount of money, but could control. I'm sure that was more important to them, that they could control their story.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I was gonna say, with television, I mean, you can in a character for a long period of time. That's the hard thing though, is ending, because several television series I watched have ended. Like they've started out great, and
Yeah,
even in the middle, the characters are great and things are going great. And then at the end, it's like they just decided it's time to wrap up, and then everything just like, and I'm like, what's going on? Like that's not the way that should have ended. Why did that person like
yeah,
that? That doesn't make even any sense from the beginning of the story. And that's the thing about television that's been hard for me sometimes is with several films, they wrap up well, very beautifully. You're like,
yeah,
great. Whether it's sad, happy, whatever. But with television, a lot of times it just feels like the last episode someone just decided to write in the last 10 minutes and there wasn't any other time. And that's the hard part is maintaining that story, a really good story until the end. But I don't know if it's because you don't really know when your television series is going to end, so you just kind of get the red light someday and you
yeah.
have to end it. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
well, a lot of the tone of a show, uh, and the continuing story of a show rests on the showrunner. So a
Okay.
showrunner will generally stay for different periods of time, but they often leave after 2 or 3 years. And they
Okay.
move on to something else, and then somebody else takes over as showrunner, and they have a different sensibility, they have a different feeling. um, and so I find that the tone of the show changes with each showrunner,
Okay.
because they inherit some writers but then they bring on new ones, and it's really, I know there's shows where the showrunner stayed really long time, and those are the shows that I think sustain themselves better.
Yeah. Do you mentioned earlier about how the important loss is, not in the sense that we like it, but it does happen, and it is a good learning point for you to lose something. Not
Mhm.
that you want to, but I'm at
Exactly.
a stage in my life where I haven't lost anything that I've truly loved yet. Um, it's been more of distant relations that, I saw maybe once or twice a year, and it was kind of like I definitely was sad in the extent that, it's sad anyone dies, but it's different when you're very close to someone. And so, what for you was, you think, the most, was there a loss in your life that was the biggest turning point for you of learning something?
I I lost things, I think at a pretty young age. My parents got divorced when I was 12, and that was like a loss of your nuclear family. That was really difficult, especially at that time. People didn't get divorces, and there was a real stigma. And people, you could sort of tell that people were whispering. If you can believe that today, it seems so, you know. Um, but I lost my boyfriend when I was 15, and that was pretty devastating.
Like he
And then
died?
yeah, yeah,
Oh, oh,
yeah. And then his mother died 2 years later, and his stepfather died 2 years later. And it just sort of, some people just don't lose people. It's amazing until, I mean, my husband has 8 brothers and sisters, and he hasn't lost anybody. So, but they just happened to me when I was young. So I've been exposed to it for a long time. And that was one of the amazing things about the episode that I died in, because it reflected so much of what I felt when I was like 15 and lost somebody. You're just like, like when you're older, like, yes, people die and you're to expect that. And and you go to funerals, so you culturally kind of learn to deal with it, what the forms are,
right.
what the do's and the don'ts are. And I love that episode on Buffy because I felt like Joss wrote in exactly what I experienced as a young person. Like, where did they go? Like, they were just here. I don't understand why they're not here anymore.
Yeah.
I can't even process that. And that beautiful speech that Anya has, I was like, oh my gosh, he totally nailed it. And so I felt really, really amazing about being a part of that episode and dying. And then when I go to cons, that is the most, that's the topic that people talk to me about the most.
Yeah.
Is, I learned I lost my mother, or I lost my father, or I lost my best friend, and you are the person who got me through that. I mean, and how could you ask for more than that as an actor?
Yeah.
To have played this character on this show that guided them through these really difficult times. Because when you go through those difficult times when you're young, there's no one there to support you,
Yeah.
amongst your peers. There's nobody to go, and now, you know, I know tons of people I've lost really good friends. Um, it's just a part of my life, and I have plenty of people around me who, can share in my grief, have compassion for that loss, or they experience that same loss, and so we experience it together. But it's very, very isolating when you're young. And then Willow goes to her closet and she can't figure out what to wear. And she's just like throwing shirts on the floor as she takes them down and working herself up into a frenzy. And I I remember doing that, you know. When I lost my father, I was like 25, and I had just like jumped on a plane to go there. So I didn't have any clothes with me. And I was like, what do you wear to a funeral? Older people wear black,
Hmm.
and all that, but what do you wear to a funeral? And I did a very Buffy thing, I think, in terms of the tone of the show. I painted my fingernails like hot pink and wore a light blue floral dress. I didn't have a lot of options, but I was like, screw you, death. Screw you for this happening to me. I couldn't accept it. And I didn't know what the ritual was. And, and it was amazing because I don't think I've ever shared this before, but my father wrote a letter to my brother and I um, about because they were divorced. He knew it would fall to my brother and I's shoulders.
Mm,
So he first told us that he'd had this beautiful, wonderful life and experienced more things than many people do. And he said, don't be sad for me. And then he listed the funeral home that we should contact, this ultimatum that it was an absolute command that we pick the cheapest casket in the showroom so we wouldn't get ripped off by the funeral home. And uh,
mm,
I forget a place to go to have lunch, afterwards, the organ music that he wanted played at his funeral. And I thought that that was like amazing for people to do that, even
yeah,
not just for younger people, but for other people, because people are so lost, they don't know what to do. So to have this checklist to follow. So, I've put that together for our daughter,
mm,
so that because she's an only child and she'll be maybe the one left with that. So that was that was incredible. And then my brother and I, just sort of armed with this letter, we went to the funeral home and my brother looks at some body that's being shown to the left and he starts to head that way because he thinks it's the casket's showroom, not a real dead person laying in a casket. So
oh,
no, we have to go this direction. So we go into the casket showroom. And so that's when, I speak up and go, we would like to see the least expensive casket you have, which you think might be a pine box, right? But pine boxes apparently are very expensive. So he went, well, it's cardboard. And I went, well, you know,
okay.
ashes to ashes, that's not a problem. So he really kind
Goodness.
of empowered us to go through that experience as young people and
Yeah.
not feel like we had to be like look like grown-ups doing it. And that
It,
was really a big relief. Um,
well, he also took the burden off your shoulders of fearing you're failing him by how you're planning it somehow,
yeah.
you know?
Or letting him down by not buying the cheapest casket in the showroom. I still remember the details of that visit, and I remember them with humor, you know, and that's great.
Was it, um, do you think the loss of your dad was the hardest? Were you very close to him?
Yeah. Yeah, it was really hard.
What was he like? Was his personality, was he?
He was very intellectual, incredibly bright, which in the case of sometimes really, really bright people, they miss another piece somewhere else. I don't know if you've experienced that. So he was very disconnected from his body. He lived everything from his shoulders up. He had an
Oh,
unbelievable mind and appreciation for literature and history. So he passed that on to me. He also traveled all over the world in the 60s and the 70s when people weren't generally, flying to Iraq for a month or going to Venezuela or going to the Philippines. So I really got my passion to travel from him.
wow.
So yeah, so that was a huge loss because I identified with him a great deal. I looked up to him, I respected him, and there's still often times when I think, I know you'd be proud of me for, all the traveling that I do and all the observations of other cultures. Like my father, when he went to Iraq for a month, he assimilated to what were some really difficult things, because as a Westerner, you're not used to eating with your hands,
Right.
uh, and all kinds of things over there. And he just kind of took them in stride. And he went to Venezuela. He was a dentist, believe it or not, in public health. So what he was
Uh, uh,
mainly about was public health, and he taught, and he would teach his students, you can't go onto an Indian reservation and just hand somebody a toothbrush. You have to understand their culture in order to, so that I learned so much from him. He went to Alaska with the Eskimos as part
Wow.
of, our national health, well, what do you call it? Our public health system. He would go into Appalachia. He would spend a month every year on a Navajo reservation. And so, I learned that, uh, what was it? We went to live in Italy for a year. And I kept saying to my daughter, this is a different culture. And we're here to observe what we might want to take from this culture. And it's a culture that puts society first, and our culture puts the individual first. And so there's going to be a lot of differences. So, so just observe it. Don't think, well, why is it this way? And, just observe it and try to fit in. Um, and she wrote me the other day about something, and she just said, not everybody's bicultural.
No, I mean,
And I think that's the gift I got from my father was understanding, traveling in the best sense of the word, where well, enough, I've said it. So,
well, you're like you said, when you're a tourist, a lot of times you go to a place to take something to bring back with you.
mhm,
But if you go to experience something and to experience what's going on around you, then you're going to take in more of the culture. And you might take less of the touristy stuff with you back,
right, right.
but you're going to get a glimpse of, this is what life is like for this culture, and maybe I
Hmm.
like it, maybe I don't, but at least I get to know what it's like to an extent.
Yeah,
Do
yeah. One of
you?
my, oh, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say some of my favorite things or the things that I've learned because I've had a house in Italy for 26 years and I have like so many friends because you meet one person, you meet 10 of their friends, you meet all their family, that's another 30 people, you know. Um, is they prize relationships so much and they're not transactional. So when somebody gives you something and then you give something in return, they're taken aback because
Hmm.
it wasn't transactional. It was because they care about you. I lost, in this thing that happened in our apartment, I lost all my belongings for a period of time. And when I went to Italy, all my friends there went through their closets and gave me clothes. I mean, talk about the shirt off somebody's back. And if you have a problem or something happens, my friends in Italy like, what? What's happening? And they're like, okay, I'll have somebody up there in 5 minutes to deal with this. They
Wow.
just the level of depth, it's almost like you become family. And when people do give gifts, they're called pensieri, which is it's a thought. So you find something that's really perfect for that person but it doesn't cost a lot. It's the thought is the most important thing.
Hmm.
And I love, absorbing that into my life, that way of looking at things. And also things, the bureaucracy over there, everything takes forever. So you quickly learn to shed your expectations that you'll just go down, pay this thing, and and it'll be done. It's never that simple. And
Yeah.
so you have to develop this enormous amount of patience that the first time you go, nothing will happen. You'll go to the wrong office or they've closed and you didn't know they were going to close because it's some saint's day or, and sometimes you'll just go, I think I'll just go to another window. So if you don't like the answer, you just go to another window because people don't like to take responsibility for rules that are contradictory. So, it's just a totally different experience. And, in the States, we sort of assume that everything's going to work and everything's going to be simple and we can get pretty offended and outraged when that doesn't happen. Like,
Yeah.
who's running this
True.
place? But So there's, different things that I've picked up. And sometimes you make terrible mistakes, like you insist on paying somebody like right away. And they're you realize they're offended by that. They have different, not like gigantically offended, but kind of like, why are you doing that? It's very interesting, and family is everything.
Yeah. Do you find that hospitality and vulnerability when it comes to friendships and people is easier for you? Because I know you mentioned your dad, very intellectual, but probably was not as emotionally in tune
Uh-huh.
as you would want him to be. So, for you, was that something that you inherited too, where it was harder to be emotional? Like, as Italians are very emotional.
Yeah,
So,
no, absolutely, absolutely. Um, and the language is so much more expressive than our language. So you learn to fill the language. Just even speaking the language puts you in a very different place. And also, when you don't have the language to maneuver a new kind of conversation that you haven't had before, you suddenly find yourself without vocabulary, without cultural context, and so I learned to communicate a lot more by touch, like touching somebody's shoulder for tenderness, um, and things like that. So it really, really opened me up a great deal. And that's a very interesting thing that you brought that up because that's absolutely true.
so you
It
like
can really
being
change you.
hugged
Sorry.
and touched.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you didn't always.
No, I would say that no, because I wasn't hugged a lot as a kid. It just wasn't my parents' way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that really demonstrative piece wasn't something that I grew up with. So I learned a lot of it from the Italians.
Yeah. Now my grandmother is from Naples, and so she immigrated over here
Hmm.
to, well, she immigrated to Canada, and then my mom was born there. We grew up in our home a lot of like Italian food, and my mom was just she did expose us to Italian movies, and when we talked to our grandmother, she would speak to Italian and to us, and we would try to say something back to her, and then she would get upset that we didn't know Italian. But I that's something always very grateful for because I think because of in part that cultural just just that culture sense, it was a very no matter how dysfunctional a unit may be, there was always a love of cuddling and
Hmm.
touching in a good way. And that's something I'm grateful for because when grew up, then I really did want to hug people. But it was funny because there's so many people even in America that I was like, because one thing I love to do with really close friends, girls, is I love to kiss their cheeks, right? Just because, I'm like, oh, it's so wonderful to see you. But there are a lot of people who are like, do not do that to me. Like, do not. I was like, oh, sorry. Like, I've had moments where I've like reached in to hug someone. They're like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I am so sorry. I say bye and I like hug you.
Yes.
This is like, um, an emotional moment. Like, I'm leaving you for today, and it was just so funny to see how so many people in America who don't have like some sort of either Italian or even Spanish or
Hmm.
European background in like the Mediterranean world, they're kind of like, what the heck are you doing to me? Don't touch me. It's
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of bad.
I know. I know. And in Italy it's about saluting someone. And if you
Yeah.
forget, go what? You don't salute me? And and that was something, if you walk into a room with a bunch of Americans, you just kind of go, "Hey, everybody." But this, you have to do it person by person. And I made a terrible mistake one day. And I just thought, there were so many people at lunch. and like 20 people in this one room. And I was like, oh man, this is a lot of people to salute. So I thought, okay, I'll just start on this side of the room and I'll make my way to the end. And at the end was the widow who had lost her husband like 8 months ago, 8 months earlier, and I wasn't there for it. And when I got to her, I was like, oh no, I should have saluted her first. So there's just these
Oh,
these these things that you pick up, and then you're not going to make that mistake again, whether it's here or there or anywhere. You're like, yeah, that's what I should have done. That's the respect that's due in this situation. Um, so so culturally different from this general high to I have to go to each person and I have to kiss them on both cheeks, and say just like a sentence and then move on, move on, move on. But I really like that. And it's I think it's changed me in many ways. And I often like tell my friends how much I love them, how grateful I am to have them, how much I still remember that particular time when they were so supportive. And it's nice to have the impetus to say that as in the immediate as you go through your life. Because I think before I would think that, I would think that, wow, I really love this person. And I would think all of that, but I wouldn't express it
yeah.
to them. And so that's a huge because then you're creating an emotional moment and everything's going to flow differently out of that than having these thoughts and keeping them to yourself. So,
Yeah, and I mean, I know it's hard because obviously, we live in wondrous times as well, and so people are not, um, at least in my opinion, there's less of a moral code. Maybe in the 1950s, you'd have your kids would go outside and they'd ride bikes and they'd go for miles and they would come home and they'd be fine. Like there was probably 90% chance they'd be fine. But now, you don't know that. Your kid could go down the block, turn the corner, and there's a really good chance they won't turn back the corner. And so
yeah.
there's a lot more fear. And so you're in this environment where you're trying to, you want to encourage an atmosphere of resilience. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, you have to be just very honest that, lots of hard things can happen. And so we kind of just have to accept that we don't live in that, father knows best period kind of thing where
Yeah.
everything's so clean cut and everybody was pretty safe. Um, but it is hard because now it's like it's like we go from two extremes to one extreme to another, either very because even in Father Knows Best, I'm bringing this up not because for fans of Father Knows Best, I'm not trying to be rude or anything, but I always remember watching that show and feeling like it was really constricted in some ways, and it was kind of like, you know, um, I remember watching it and feeling that it wasn't as open and emotional as I would have liked. But that was the time period. And so if you would meet
Hmm.
someone from that time who's now older, you didn't have that very emotive upbringing. But now you have a very big extreme where you switch it and you'll have kids who have experienced such bad emotional abuse, they don't know how to control their emotions and the place. And so like there's these extremes. And it is sad to me because it's like emotion is a beautiful thing and it's a gift, but it's really hard to find homes or even just settings where like emotions are used in a good way and safely displayed and enjoyed.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think friendships are so important. I mean, and everybody's talking about that nowadays, but I've had I have two groups of really, really, really good friends, and one we our friendship started when we were like 24, and we're still like really close.
Wow.
And the other group are about like they're the friends I have who live in Italy, and part of the year. Uh, but we're also friends in in the States, sometimes we're from the same place and sometimes we're not from the same place, but we have this unifying experience of living in Italy in the same area. And so those friends are amazing. So I feel incredibly lucky to have these friends because I didn't have friends growing up, you know? And I didn't really have any friends that I took from college, but I have these friends from my 20s. And I think that I have an extraordinary amount of good friends and close friends, from what I hear. So it's, I just feel like it, I think I'm following your conversation in terms of fighting the anger that's out there and the lack of morals, people acting out in really violent, hurtful ways. You have to keep yourself emotionally safe on some level. You have to live in that world. You have to get on a plane and pay attention to people.
Yeah.
You can't just like go to your seat, blank out, read your book. You have to like nowadays you have to have your feelers out for something that might go on in the periphery of some action you might need to take. And that's really dispiriting. Um, and to have to send your kids off to school and the kids are afraid and you're afraid for them.
Hmm.
And the chances of it happening are probably statistically really small, but it happens enough that we all have to be afraid of it and be prepared for it. And kids have to be trained for it. And all that is it's a cost of your emotional well-being. And I think that the thing that can counter that is friendships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think makes a good friendship? Because I think that can be hard too, especially for young people to determine, is this a really good friend? Is this just a popular friend? Is this just that's something actually with my growing up, because I used to think I won't call it, I would call too many people friends. And what would happen
Mhm.
is over time I would notice that you know, I was always looking for that one friend who would fulfill all the boxes and would do them all really, really well. And what always happened is I thought I'd find one, and then they would do something hurtful or they wouldn't check a certain box at some point, and I'd be like, oh, I guess I lost a friend. I need to keep looking for that bosom
Mhm.
friend. Like Anne of Green
Mhm.
Gables is always looking. She's got Diana. I want to find this friend. But when I started getting into my 20s, I was like, I think you just have to accept that some friends will be fours in some things and fives in others, and others will be threes in some things and others will be fives. But that doesn't mean they can't be your friend. It's just there's certain
Mhm.
aspects that maybe Krista is going to fulfill that Celine isn't, but
Mhm.
they're both your friends. And there's like this opening for me of like what a friend meant because it used to be such a narrow definition. If you're my friend, then you have to have these things. So,
Mhm.
for you, maybe you've even changed in your opinion of this since when you were younger, you didn't have friends, and maybe in your 20s you did. Is there for you like what are you like, okay, this is my friend. I can consider you a
I think it's an interesting thing because I think back, like, how do you make a really good friend in high school? A
It's
real
hard.
tough one. You're not fully formed, they're not fully formed. You're capable of being really mean when that isn't what you want to do. You can really hurt somebody without having the maturity to realize it or to the maturity to deal with it and
Yeah,
address it.
it's true.
Um, the friends that I have from my 20s and the friends that I have who we formed later, I think one of the things is no one fills all the boxes.
Yeah.
And we all can drive each other crazy at times. It's a lot about, forgiving people for not living up because there is no perfect friend. So, I have friends that drive me crazy in some areas. And but then I also know how supportive they are and how much they care for me. And so I'll get annoyed and then I'll go, she does that. That's just who she is. And um, there's all these other boxes where she can be really wonderful. And, different, some people can go with you to some really dark places together,
It's true.
and other people can't kind of handle that. So each one of my friends is very, very different. Almost none of them check all the boxes, but as a whole, I have community with them. And that's an incredible thing when your friends become community. And so you're not living with them on a one friend to one friend basis. You're living within a community
True.
and you all know each other's flaws and ways of dealing with things.
Yeah.
Uh,
And so you've been talking about this whole time because even with, starting with films, with t TV shows, it's much more community based. I mean, you would hope. I mean, I've heard sometimes, it like each other. The majority of the time, the TV cast gets along pretty well. So you have like this community, and then you've got your community in Italy, which I cannot wait to go to. I hope to go to Italy someday. And then,
you've got to go to Naples.
I know,
Naples is amazing.
Christine, I know. I that my husband and I, we're still a young couple, we're getting
Mhm.
our financial
Yeah, yeah,
but no, it is definitely a list. We really want to go, and my husband's really sweet because he knows how much it means to me, so it's very high for him. He wants to do it.
yeah.
Um, but I was gonna say, like, this whole thing has been very community based, even in Italy and now with friends.
Hmm.
Community is very important to
Yeah.
life.
Do you have relatives who are still there?
I probably do, but because of just the brokenness of families, they
Hmm.
would cut ties. So, so by my generation, I don't know who's still there, if that makes sense, because I didn't
Yeah.
know by the time I was born, because the connections weren't formed with my,
Yeah.
you
Do you
know.
know like what town they're from or what part of Naples they might be from?
Gosh, I know I could find I know this I've been told where my grandma is from. She was from a small titles, but I don't remember the name of it. You've
Because
probably
you
been
can
there.
actually sometimes, like about 20 years ago, I had friends in Italy who found their American relatives by searching on Facebook.
Really?
Yeah, so if you get a last name and like, their last name was Tototro, it's not exactly a common name. And but it's amazing because I met a woman who was American who came through our area, and she was related to our Italian teacher. So we met her, and she was from Umbria, which is where we spend our time, and she went into the village that her grandmother was from. And a guy like got down from his ladder and went, "You must be so and so's granddaughter." He recognized her face.
Oh my gosh, that's so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. So, yeah, see if you can find anybody before you go because they will give you the shirts off your back. They will fold you into their table. They'll call other relatives to come by and meet you. It's a really, really special thing for them.
If that happens to me, I think I'll just die on the spot. That's how happy I'll be.
Yeah. And then those connections will last forever because once you're their friend, that's the other thing I think about friendship is commitment.
Yep.
Because it's like a marriage. The person doesn't realize all your dreams and all your boxes and so even when so you're committed to that relationship even when it gets rocky.
Yep. And that's, I think, when you mentioned even high school and college, I think that's why are hard to last then because you haven't learned much about commitment when you're 18
Hmm.
for the majority of people. And so you don't know what to do when hard stuff comes. You're like, I guess I just walk away because it's too hard. Like I don't really know what I'm supposed to do. So this
Yeah,
idea of commitment isn't really well grained and well formed, so you're kind of just like it's easier to just leave.
yeah. And sometimes leaving is the right thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes you realize that there's always going to be hurt and or contention or, that it's just not going to work out.
Yeah.
You're just like oil and water and it isn't going to work.
Yeah.
And in that case, it can be very emotionally healthy to move on. But at the same time, if the overall share of joy or share of a love of something is there and you feel most of the time really good about this person, then and sometimes you have to, I mean, we're living in a place where none of our friends are now, so I have to be very conscious of staying in touch with people.
Hmm.
I need to send texts to my friends in Italy and let them know that I'm thinking about them. I'm not just like away for 4 months. And also to reach out to my friends. I have so many friends. It's sometimes it's tiring. I just want to go to bed. I'm so tired. And
We
you're
got
like,
a calendar. Monday is
yeah, right, right. And you really need to call my aunt. I really need to check in with Carol and see how she's doing. It's you, that's part of the commitment
yeah.
is keeping up the communication. How are you? What's going on with that situation that you had the last time we talked? You know. So I think all those things are really helpful in cultivating and maintaining friendships.
Well, I think and this is just my impression. Obviously, we don't know each other very well. It's hard for me to say I know you because I think that's such a deep thing to say. But point being is that you seem very content, and I haven't met too many people from the acting world. And maybe it's just the people I've met. They've all been very nice. I very
Mhm.
rarely have had a bad interaction. But you are very down to earth and very you love community, you love friendships, you love a home setting. Like, I guess that's not just something I've come across very often because it's very career oriented for many people, which isn't
Yeah.
necessarily a bad thing. But talking to you, I feel like I'm talking to someone from next door, if that makes sense, like in a kind way. Because you seem you're very happy with the opportunities you have or do get to do. It's not what you're like living. You seem to have a much
Yeah.
wider
Yeah.
perspective.
And I feel very fortunate about that. I just sort of see life as chapters, which is kind of easy to do because each job is a chapter long, short or longer in terms of but I never defined myself as that. And I have a lot of interests. As you mentioned earlier, photography. I went to photography school um, at Santa Monica College, which is a really good program. And I garden and, take care of my grandsons. And I think as I've gotten older, it's humbling because the actors that I grew up many of them who came before me, like I knew what was going on in the theater in the 50s and the 60s and the 40s and the playwrights and the canon of plays. Um, and then during my period in New York, there were actors that I had so much respect for, and I saw, incredible theater living in New York. That acting. I used to have this on the in my mind, but it's at its best, it's reflecting humanity so that people can see it in themselves.
Yeah.
And it can be life-changing. Um, which is why I feel so blessed to have had Buffy and had this opportunity to reflect something that gives something to people that's positive. But okay, get back to what I was saying. Those people that I knew who came before me and the plays that came before me, and then the people that I watched through my 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s and on. Um, people, young people today, that sounds so trite, like young people today, but the people who are like my daughter's age, she's 34, they don't know any of those people. Their names don't ring a bell.
Yeah,
And
it's
and
true.
so it's like, wow, that's really humbling because there's nothing left of that. Maybe they, filmed something at Lincoln Center, but it disappears. It disappears. So then you kind of go, wow, you
Hmm.
all of that is in the past. There'll be, and I too will vanish into the ether, you know, eventually. uh, become like silent films and nobody watches them anymore, and that was once really a whole full thing. So that's getting older and watching how these incredible actors, their films aren't particularly relevant today. Some are, but a lot of them aren't.
True.
Um, you sort of go, no, your life can't be about this. Your life should be about connections to people. So, and I think too, to harken back to the earlier part of our conversation, losing people really sharpens that too.
Yeah.
Those losses make you understand in such a visceral way that how briefly you're here. And
Yeah.
what's really important are the daily connections that you make with the people that you love.
Yeah.
You know.
Christine, I think you need to narrate an audiobook, like life lessons, life with you. Because you have a very soothing voice.
Oh, thank you. I
But
did
also
an
you're just
audiobook
like,
and nobody
this is my
asked me
life
back.
lessons from Kristine Sutherland. For you today. Just break them up by day, like little beginning devotional morning things. Be like, this is
Yes.
a thought. You would do so well at that.
Well, that's why it's so important that I have friends who uh, I can have lighthearted times with, or get out of the house and do things with them, Like we would go to a sagra, which is a festival. And, it's always around a particular food. So, you travel there, you park the car, you fight the crowds to get in, and everything's on paper plates. And, you get the food. If it's an asparagus festival, it's going to be asparagus and everything. And then you sit at these long communal tables. And then afterwards, these kind of bad bands play, and everybody gets on the dance floor it- from young people to there's always a couple who are like in their 60s or their 70s, and they do the waltz and the cha-cha-cha, and in this really rural area, and you watch them and you go, that's so amazing. And they've been together forever. So those things are wonderful for me to experience because sometimes I'm too reflective.
Yeah.
Sometimes I need to just get out and do something fun. So, so it's all about sort of finding a balance. And my husband's really fun and very, very joyful. So we make a good package.
Well, Christine, it's been such a gift. I've enjoyed this so much. I mean, it's just felt
Oh,
like
me
having
too.
coffee with you. And
Yeah, you're so easy to talk to.
thank you. You are
Yeah.
as well. So I'm very
I would go, I
grateful.
want you to be my friend.
Yes, I could use more friends. Many friends. I'm very envious of you at this moment in time. But Christine, thank you so much and
Yes,
blessings on your day. And I'm very grateful again for the time we had.
thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. Bye. Thank
Great. Bye.